Well, hello there, Stacey Murphy here from Grow Your Own Vegetables. And in this video, we're going to talk about how to grow ginger and turmeric right at home, regardless of whether you're going to grow in a container or whether you're going to grow in the soil, or maybe you have a short growing season that's a little bit cold, or if you have a blazing hot long season. I'm going to share with you the strategies that you need to succeed, and I'm also going to share a couple of the pitfalls to avoid. And there's so many reasons to grow ginger and turmeric. Holy cow, these little babies. Now, I am no doctor and I don't play one on the internet, but there are tons of studies that show that these have cancer-fighting properties, especially the turmeric, that they boost immunity against all kinds of chronic diseases. They have anti-inflammatory properties. And I know for me, they just taste delicious. And the ginger, I have this every morning. I actually have both of these every morning in my smoothies. And I end up with a boost of energy, and it's just delicious. So not only are there all these health benefits, but when you grow them at home, the other benefits are that when fresh, these things taste so much better fresh than they do even from the ones that you can buy at the grocery store, because they're picked directly from your yard. That's one huge benefit to growing them yourself. The flavor is just dynamic. And then there's also the benefit of being in the garden, of course, and having a relationship to the plant. It's just a lot of fun. And the beauty, if you've ever seen a ginger or a turmeric plant flower, it is just gorgeous. And it's a moment that I cherish in the growing season. And the other thing about these plants is that they really don't require a whole lot of space to grow one of these plants right at home. You just need a small container and you can start growing your own ginger or turmeric. And the reason why we're talking about growing ginger and turmeric together is that essentially the same process is used to grow both. So both of them grow rhizomatically. Now, what the heck does that mean? So with ginger and turmeric plants, they start with a mother root, and this is typically what you see at the grocery store. From there, it starts to branch off into different rhizomes. And each one of those rhizomes, they start to create little buds or bumps off the side of them. And those are the things that start to begin to grow more rhizomes and more sprouting plants. And both of ginger and turmeric are a part of the same ginger family, which includes cardamom as well. Okay, so essentially as the buds start to sprout, what's going to happen is that the plant grows more and more rhizomes underground, and shoots are going to come up above ground. And then essentially the plant is going to be perennial. So you can continue to grow the same plant for years. You can increase the yield year after year. And the cool thing is that in the cold climates, you bring your plants indoors over the winter. And in hot climates, they just go dormant below 50 degrees Fahrenheit or 10 degrees Celsius. So this is a plant that you can enjoy So this is a plant that you can grow wherever you live. And that's what I'm going to be showing you in this video. So there are so many reasons to grow ginger and turmeric right at home, but there are really 5 things that I would want you to know before you get started. These are big picture things that I think anybody should understand before they get started so that they have the right expectations going into growing these plants. So the first thing that I would want anybody to know if they're getting started growing ginger or turmeric is that these are plants that require a little bit more patience than other vegetables and herbs. And I don't mean patience in terms of the plant is hard to grow. I mean patience in terms of time frame. So if you're going to grow your own greens like you see behind me, you can have greens within weeks. You can have microgreens within 2 weeks. It's really fast. But in that same time, this is all that happened for my ginger. So this little sprout, which is not yet a plant and it's not yet growing more ginger, the same time that it took me to put a kale plant into the ground and harvest a couple leaves, I got like a little shoot. That's all I got, all right? So this is not a short process. It's really a game of waiting. Now the good news is if you set things up right, which I'm going to be sharing with you later on in the video about how to set things up right, all it is a waiting game, and it's pretty simple, but you do have to have the patience to sit and wait it out. All right, so that's the first thing I would want anybody to know is it's not a quick plant by any means. All right, and good things come to those who wait. Really good things come to those who wait. Very delicious things come to those who wait. All right, so that's the first thing I would want anybody to know. The second thing that I would want you to know is that I mentioned that you can grow ginger and turmeric in small containers. But the thing is that the growth of the plant is related to the size of that container. So if you only have a container that's this big, That's the maximum amount of ginger or turmeric that you're going to get out of that plant. So while you can grow it in small containers, you might wait a long time, and then you're only going to get as much turmeric or ginger that can fit into that container. So it's not a huge amount of harvest for the amount of time you wait. But like I said, it's packed with all kinds of nutritional benefits. It's delicious. The plant is beautiful. There's so many other reasons why you're growing it that to me, it's worth it, and it's fun to grow it. And the third thing that I would want anybody to know about growing ginger or turmeric before they get started is that this is really a companion plant. In the long run, it is your ally for your health. And so in return, all you really need to do is just make sure you're watching it every day and you're aware of it and you're noticing what's going on with it. Because this is a plant that's going to be around for months, this is really a plant that you need to love, you need to cherish. It needs to be a part of your weekly routine. You don't have to spend a whole lot of time. You just have to check in on it and make sure everything's okay. And it only takes a couple seconds to check in on it. You don't have to do a whole lot while you're waiting, but it is something that you want to make sure is within your line of sight so that you see it, and if anything starts to go wrong, that you can adjust, all right? So it needs to be a companion for yourself. So the fourth thing I would want people to know about getting started growing ginger or turmeric is that a lot of people don't have a lot of trouble getting the plant started, but then the plant sort of stalls out at a certain point, all right? And so this happens to quite a few people, and I'm going to be sharing tips about how to feed your plants. And so I want you to pay special attention to that section so that your plants don't stall out, so that they continue to thrive and they continue to grow. So the fifth and final thing that I would want anybody to know about growing ginger and turmeric before they get started is that these are very special vegetables. And they are vegetables, even though most people think of them as herbs. They don't need exactly the same thing as other vegetables and herbs. So if you're growing a vegetable and herb garden, these guys, you might grow them just a little bit differently. And here's what I mean by that. Your typical vegetables and herbs, they love full sun, all right? These guys are subtropical plants that love the heat, but they really like dappled shade and they love higher humidity levels. So I'm going to share with you how to create that microclimate so that your plants really thrive. And you don't have to live in a subtropical climate to grow these guys. I grew them in Brooklyn. I grow them here in California. You can grow them where you are too. It's just a matter of timing them in the season so that you create the right microclimate that's going to work for you. And when I say microclimate, what do I mean by that? So essentially, your regular climate of your garden, you're going to have your vegetable garden. It's going to want full sun. And then for these guys, you might want to grow them in a container so that you can move it to different parts of your yard or your garden to see what they like the most, because they don't like the heat of the sun, but they do like heat. And so you want to find that perfect mix of a place in your yard that's going to be hot, but a little bit shaded out. All right, let's get started. So there are essentially 3 stages to growing your own ginger and turmeric right at home. And I'm going to share with you the essential tips that you need to master those 3 stages of growth, no matter whether you're growing in a container or whether you're growing in the ground, and whether or not you're growing in a hot weather climate or a cold climate with a short season. All right, so let's get started. So the first stage of growing your own ginger and turmeric right at home, you guessed it, it's getting started. Everybody has to get started somewhere. And with ginger and turmeric, it's much easier than you might think. So there are 3 essential strategies that you can use to get started growing your own ginger and turmeric. And essentially they are soak, split, and search. And I'm going to go through all 3 of those in that order. So the first one of those strategies is soaking ginger. And what this means is that when you go to the grocery store, you may have access to edible, organic ginger and turmeric, all right? Something that looks something like this. It's somewhat dried out. So what you want to do is you want to buy organic ginger or turmeric, and I say organic because if you buy non-organic, it's possible that they may have soaked it in a growth inhibitor, or there might have been chemicals used in the process of growing it, and you want to just avoid all of that. So buying organic is the best way to go if you have access to it. And the other thing that I would say is that even when you buy some of the organic, they may have been sprayed with some sort of growth inhibitor to keep them at this stage. But what's interesting is you'll notice that this is organic ginger that I bought at the store, and it's somewhat dried out. Look how dried out it is compared to this, which is nice and juicy. Can you see the difference? It's kind of dried out, kind of juicy. So this one I bought at the store, it's organic. Because it doesn't have the growth inhibitor, it's already starting to sprout right here, even without soaking it. That's pretty cool. So I know that this is organic because it just started to sprout all on its own. Okay, so you pick up organic ginger or turmeric from the grocery store. And what you want to do is to get it started, to get the ball rolling as quickly as possible. What you can do is take just a bowl of water, and I would recommend warm, like lukewarm water, like air temperature. And what I mean by that is if it feels cold to your hand, then it needs to be a little bit warmer. If it feels warm to your hand, you might want to cool it down just a little bit. So that'll ensure that it's about the same temperature as you. So what you do is you just fill the bowl with water, and then you pop in your ginger and your turmeric, and you let it soak for 24 hours just to get it started and just to let it rehydrate a bit, all right? So you're going to do that for 24 hours. That's your first step. The second step from there is that you can either just directly put that into the ground and let it sprout from there, or you can continue a sort of water soaking method. And it's up to you which one you prefer. So what I like to do is to use a shallow dish, a shallow pan, and I like that it's flat, all right? And then what I like to do is I like to take my ginger and my turmeric and lay it in so that the water comes up to about halfway on the plants so that the top surface has access to air and the bottom surface has access to water. What that's going to do is it's going to hydrate, but it's also going to allow them to also dry out and not get too wet. And what I like to do is about once a day, I come in and I change the water, make sure that it's clean and clear, and I keep putting in the warm water, the lukewarm water, and once a day I just flip them to the other side so that the part that was getting access to water now has access to air and vice versa. And I would leave them there until they start to sprout. So that's one way to do it. And there's a second way, which is once you soak them overnight in the warm water, you can go out and you can plant them directly into your potting mix if you're growing in a container, or into your soil if you're growing in the ground. And I did that recently, and check this out. So this guy, I popped right in the earth right after I had soaked it overnight. And this guy happened after a couple of weeks, and these roots are starting to form. So this is already sprouting I just put it in the ground and I've been watering regularly, and it's sprouting on its own. So here's the deal with this process. So this is the soaking process to kickstart your growth. It's going to the grocery store. You have access to the turmeric and the ginger at the grocery store. So it's one of your easiest ways to get started because it's available right at your grocery store. And then by soaking it, you just give it a kickstart, and then you can either continue soaking it indoors or put it outdoors. And so if you're in a cold region, you can get a real kickstart on the season by putting it in one of these flat containers of water and just flipping it back and forth until it sprouts. And then at a certain point, what's going to happen is it's going to sprout and point upward. At that point, you don't want to flip it anymore. You just let it keep sprouting upwards, and you could put it in some potting mix at that point. Here's a pro tip when you're looking at ginger and garlic at the grocery store and you're wondering which ones to pick for growing at home. This is a really, really fresh piece of garlic. I don't know if you can see this, but it is really beautiful, bright yellow and gorgeous. And if you look here, this piece here is kind of pinkish. The camera might not pick this up, but that is a sign of super fresh ginger that has been harvested recently. And that means that when you go to soak this and plant this, because it's fresh, it's going to grow even faster than something that's been around a little bit longer. However, plants want to grow. They really want to grow. This guy looks totally dried up and shriveled up. You can see like the wrinkles right here because it's so dry. But here's the deal. it is sprouting right here. So even though this guy seems like it's much drier than this guy, it still is sprouting. So when you're looking for plants, do the best that you can in order for the best possible results. But at the same time, even if what you have seems subpar, you never know. Things, they want to grow for you. They really do. So that is essentially the soak first method. And the benefits to it is that you have access to organic turmeric and ginger at the grocery store, and you're just going to use that. So that's the benefit. The drawback is that it's going to take some time because you're starting from the very beginning of the plant and you're waiting for it to sprout. So if you want to get a head start, you can do a splitting method. And for the splitting method, essentially what you're going to look for is you're going to look for somebody who already has established plants. And you can find those people on meetup groups, on Facebook groups, local gardening events, and network and talk to people and ask people. And so many folks are so excited to share plants. It's one of the beautiful parts of gardening is that it's more fun together. People love sharing plants. They love sharing knowledge. So if you can find somebody who has an established plant and ask them for a little divider so that you can get started at home as well, all right? And recently I did exactly this. I found somebody on a local Facebook group and I offered a trade in exchange for something that I had available in my garden. And this person was like, yeah, I'm totally down for this. I'll go out and I'll divide that plant. And by the way, I'm going to deliver it to your door. How cool is that? So gardening communities are really incredible. And when you can tap into your gardening community, you may have access to more plants than you think is possible. And there are more plants besides ginger and turmeric that you can divide this way. And so when you connect with other gardeners, this is a way to get started with plants and get a kickstart. So instead of starting at this stage and having to get to this stage and then having to get to an actual plant, you can jump forward in time a couple months and actually get straight to the plant. All right, so we've talked about two strategies so far. We talked about soaking and splitting to get your plant started. The third option is searching. And what I mean by that is actually buying them online. Did you know that you can buy live plants online? How cool is that? So I recently went online and I went to Amazon, I went to Etsy, I went to, where else did I go? I went to one other site and I basically looked at reviews for who was selling live ginger and turmeric plants. I looked at all the reviews. I looked at who had video reviews or image reviews, people who said, I received the plants, they were exactly what they were supposed to look like, and people who had actually sent in photo reviews of what they had received in the mail. And I bought through somebody like that on Etsy, and I ordered 3 plants. And the beautiful part was that they delivered 6 plants because it's part of the process for them. They want a very good customer. They want the customer to be happy, and they wanted to make sure that if they sent 3 plants, something could have happened along the way, so they sent me 6 just in case. So I got extra plants out of the deal, which is really cool. And they showed up in the mail. They were alive. They were beautiful. They were wrapped in plastic so that the root systems remained moist. And everything went according to plan. It was wonderful. So that's another way to get started with plants. So instead of starting here, which will take a couple weeks to get to a sprout and then a plant, you could skip ahead and you could order a live plant online. And one last note about those 3 ways to get started, soaking, splitting, and searching online, is that in all cases, you want to ask the critical questions along the way. Was that grown organically? If it was not grown organically, can you tell me a little bit about what was used on the plant and why? And if you're okay with the answers, then I would recommend moving forward. So for all 3 of these different ways of getting started, at some point you've got to put the plant in the soil or in the ground or in a container or whatever the case may be. So what do? Well, so for the soaking method, you just take your ginger or turmeric and you go and you basically plant it about 1 to 2 inches deep. If you want to know how deep 1 to 2 inches is, for those of you on the metric system, your thumb, the first knuckle is about 1 inch, 2 inches about your full thumb. So basically you dig up a little bit of your potting mix or soil, you place this in and you cover it up. And here's the thing, it's going to want to grow no matter what. If you know where the sprout is going to emerge, it's nice if that's pointing upward to give it some help. But this one, take a look. The roots are, this one sprouted this way where this was kind of going sideways. So now the roots are growing down and the sprout is growing up. The plant will figure it out. So just plant it down about 1 to 2 inches and it'll be good to go. And for the plants that you either got from a friend that were split or the ones that you purchased online, it's super simple. You just dig a little hole and you put the transplant into the ground. You bury it up into the stem. You make sure the roots are underground and the stem is above ground, and you water it in. And one last note about these baby plants. This is a critical stage where they are more susceptible to sunlight, so you do want to make sure that they are shaded out when they are first planted. All right, so you got your ginger and your turmeric plants started. Now what? The next stage of the process is caring for your plants or feeding your plants. And so you need a strategy that's going to work no matter whether you're growing in a container or whether you're growing outdoors. So I'm going to cover both of those separately because they're very different. So ginger and turmeric, they are heavy feeders. So what the heck does that mean anyway? So here's the deal. Vegetables and herbs, they all require a healthy, fertile soil that's just full of life, that has tons of biology in it, all right? That's what provides us food that is chock full of nutrients. If the soil is dead, then there's no nutrients that are available for our plants. So we require a very healthy, fertile soil for all vegetables and herbs. And then there are some vegetables and herbs that are considered heavy feeders, which just means they need a little extra love. Okay, so a quick lesson about soil, very briefly, so you understand what I mean about all vegetables and herbs need a healthy, fertile soil. So basically what happens with plants is they have their leaves, and the leaves photosynthesize. And what happens is the plants take in sun and they take in carbon dioxide, and they transfer those two things, they transform it into sugars that are available for the roots of the plant, as well as oxygen that's released into the atmosphere for us to breathe. Thank you, plants. And those sugars that are created in that process go down to the roots, and inside the roots, microorganisms feed off of the sugars, and in response to that, they deliver nutrients to the plants. And those are the exact nutrients that we consume and that we need for a healthy, vital life. So without healthy soil or healthy growing medium, if you're growing in a container, your plants don't have the life that they need to really thrive. All right, so that's what we're gonna, when I say that we're going to have a feeding strategy for your plants, it's really about a ecosystem, a strong, healthy ecosystem for your roots in order for your plants to thrive, for you to get the most benefit from your plants, all right? So I just want to make that clear what we're talking about here when we say feeding the plants. It's a little bit misleading. We're not technically feeding the plants. We're feeding the life in the soil that's feeding the plants that then nourishes us. All right, so I hope that's clear. So there are two different ways to feed your plants depending on whether you're growing in a container or whether you're growing in a soil bed, all right? And the reason it's different is that when you're in a container, the plant only has what's available in that small container to thrive. But when it's growing, let's say, in a planted bed where the roots can spread much deeper, they can get life and energy from a much wider source. So it's a little bit different. And either one works as long as you follow the formula. All right, so here are the two different strategies. So if you're planting directly outside into a raised planting bed that has connection to the earth below it, or just even directly right into your soil wherever you are, what you want to do with all your vegetables and herbs is you want to lay down at least 2 inches like this, the height of your thumb, 2 inches of good quality compost across the entire length of your bed. And that's going to ensure that over the course of the season that you have sort of a drip release of life and benefits that are going to keep your plants healthy. All right, so 2 inches at the start of the season across all of your beds. And if you're planted outside, that's most of what you're going to need. So let's talk about that compost for just a moment. If you're using plant-based compost, you just want to make sure that it's been sourced organically so that your plants are not getting any toxic chemicals from like pesticides or herbicides. So a good plant compost is a good way to start. I would recommend adding, if you have access to it, some worm castings or some vermicompost, because that's really going to improve the life in the soil, and it's going to add all sorts of beneficial bacteria. It's been shown to help prevent diseases. It's absolutely magic. You got to get the worm poop. You got to get the worm poop. So that's a good source of compost as well. And if you're using animal manures in any way, make sure that they are fully composted and cured before you're using them for planting vegetables and herbs, all right? And make sure they're organic, because a lot of times with animals, if they have fed on material that is not organic, then their poop has all of those toxins that's associated with all of those chemical sprays. And so that's something that you don't want in your garden. Things like herbicides can actually reduce the growth of your plant. They can inhibit the growth of your plant. So you want to make sure that your sources for your compost are always organic. All right, super important. All right, so you started with a good layer of compost outdoors. The next stage is you may want to add an extra oomph. And you know, the thing is when you add a little extra oomph, your plants can feel the love. And so extra, you know, if you start with 2 inches of compost at the start of the season and you're growing in the soil, you can also add compost teas once a month. That's going to add beneficial microorganisms and bacteria to the plant, and it's going to help create even more of a thriving ecosystem for your plants. So that can be beneficial. You can also, over the course of the season, add some mulch from different plants that might add some additional benefits. Things like comfrey or things like moringa, if you have it around, you can chop it and you can drop it around the plants. And those things, as they decompose, not only is it adding life to the soil, the microorganisms are going to start to break all that down, but it's adding more nutrients, it's adding all kinds of benefit. So you can mulch with those extra plants, and you can also spray with or water with some sort of emulsion. So there are liquid seaweed or liquid fish emulsions that are available on the market, and you can basically mix them up with some water. And you want to typically go according to the directions on the bottle, but typically I do like a capful of the emulsion, and then I basically put that into a watering can and I fill the watering can with water, and then I use that to water the plants. And you could do that once a month, and if you do more, it's likely that your plants will explode with growth. I mean, the more you add, the more benefit you typically see, as long as what you're putting on the plants is organic and it's not a fertilizer. You don't want to go to the store and get something that has chemicals in it or just has numbers like NPK numbers. You want to actually go to the source, and you want to get, you know, liquid seaweed or liquid fish, and then take it and dilute it and water that on, and that's just adding life to your soil. So that's what you want to do if you're growing in the soil. And what we found growing in the soil is it doesn't require very much love and attention for the plants to really thrive. All right. Now, let's say you're growing in a container. It's a little bit different. The plants only have that small little container in order to get all of the plant's needs taken care of. So basically, you're going to be using the same ingredients, but you're going to be using them in smaller quantities and more often to keep that cycle of life happening, all right? So whereas in the ground, you can kind of put all the compost in at once, and over time, it will drip release out. And in the container, you want to continuously add. So what I would recommend for growing in containers is you want to add maybe an inch to start with for compost, like the size of your first knuckle, an inch of compost across the top of your potting mix. And you want to start with a really good potting mix, by the way, something that has organic matter in it, something that is certified OMRI or CDFA is some of the best brands that you can find on the market. Even those labels, you know, they're our best strategy for making sure that what's in the bag is what is said is in the bag. But the labeling, it's always a little bit tricky. So that's your best strategy moving forward. is something that is OMRI or CDFA, even better. Get a nice quality bag mix. Add in a good inch of good quality compost, and I would recommend getting some of those worm castings in there because that's going to be really beneficial. And then over the course of the rest of the growing season, I would recommend every 2 weeks you're going to take your fish emulsion or your seaweed emulsion, depending on whether or not you're going to work with animal products or not. Every 2 weeks, you're going to dilute it and you're going to water the plants with it so that you continuously add more beneficial life into that soil. And I would recommend, so every 2 weeks, I would recommend watering with the emulsions. And I would recommend once a month, you could add some more compost if you had it, or you could add some compost tea. Anything that will increase the life in that soil is going to make your plants really thrive, all right? That is the key to feeding your plants, but really what you're doing is feeding the soil. And when you do that, what you'll see is a process over the course of the season of thriving plants. If you don't do this, what you might see is stunted growth. The plants might just fizzle out. They might get to a certain height in a container and they might just stop growing altogether. So you really need to continue to feed the soil in order for those plants to grow. Now that you know how to feed your ginger and turmeric plants, let's talk about what to expect as your plants grow, all right? And after 1 month, you're going to start to see greenery, and you're going to start to see greenery that's about 9 inches or 25 centimeters tall. And this is about the same size as if you were to find somebody and split a plant, or if you were to search and find a plant online. This might be the size that you get. So that's why you're shortcutting the process if you find a plant online versus if you soak a plant to get it started, all right? You skip ahead that first month. And in order to get to this state, you really need warm temperatures. Shade is okay, even indoors is okay. And so you wanna make sure that you're within ideally 70 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 21 to 24 degrees Celsius. But you can go a little bit wider than that, and a little bit warmer, a little bit cooler. Just don't go below 50 degrees Fahrenheit or 10 degrees Celsius because your plants will not produce underneath those temperatures. So you want to keep these plants indoors if you need to, if you have a short growing season, until it gets warm enough outside to put the plant outside. So this is what the turmeric plant looks like after about 1 month old. And you can see here it's got one leaf that's big and a little one that's kind of wrapped up. It's about 9 inches tall. And then ginger, very similarly in terms of size. It has a few more leaves, but about the same size. And then after 4 months total, so not an additional 4 months, but after 4 months total, you'll see that your plants are about 2 to 3 feet tall. Some of them may at this point start to think about flowering. If you're growing them in a warm climate, in containers they might not flower yet, but after 4 months they'll be about 2 to 3 feet tall and they'll have a couple more leaves. And then at this time when you dig them up, they may or may not have edible rhizomes yet. So the mother that you planted has produced a lot of roots and she's sent off the shoots that are growing above ground, but there may not be edible rhizomes yet. Somewhere between 4 and 6 months, you'll start to see baby turmeric and baby ginger start to form. And so if you have a short season, you can get some rhizomes in that time. You just want to make sure you leave them as long as possible. And again, your plant will be about 2 to 3 feet tall at this point, about 1 meter tall. And then at about 8 to 10 months, this is when the sort of peak harvest really starts to happen for a lot of people in hot climates. And your plants will be about 3 to 4 feet tall, over 1 meter tall. You can see the ginger on the left is a little bit spikier leaves and the turmeric on the right has wider leaves. You'll also notice that the leaves in general have yellowing and browning. That's totally normal. That happens. Oftentimes the plants, even when they're grown in dappled shade, will just get a little bit too much sun and they will show signs of that. So these plants, the way that we keep them in the dappled shade, it looks like they're out in the sun, but they're not. These actually are grown in California and they are under shade cloth. So they are inside of a hoop house And that hoop house has plastic on the outside, and then it has a layer shade cloth, which is a 50% shade cloth, so that these plants aren't getting full sun. And on top of that, because they're grown inside of the hoop house, that hoop house is providing a little bit of humidity, extra humidity for these plants, because they are subtropical and they do like a little bit of humidity. So the good news is if you're growing in places like the Pacific Northwest, or if you're growing in the Northeast, or you're growing around the Great Lakes, you've got some humidity already in the air. If you're growing in Florida, you've got some humidity already in the air. And all you really need is to find a good spot with a little bit of shade. Now, as you're growing, the other thing that can provide shade is other plants. So here in California, the turmeric plants that you see here were grown among moringa plants, and the moringa plants are providing a little bit of dappled shade as well. And on top of that, the moringa plants are, as they evaporate moisture, they are basically providing more humidity for the turmeric plants. And as you're growing these plants, as they're getting taller and taller, the one thing you want to watch for is the base of the plant. You want to cover up the rhizomes as they grow. If they start growing above ground, cover with a little bit more soil, with more compost, whatever you have available, some mulch if you need to. That way it's going to provide more space for more rhizomes to grow in. And then what you'll find is after the season, between 4 months and 10 months, you're going to start to see flowering. And the only thing is that when you're growing in containers, you may or may not see flowering. That's totally okay. It still means the plants are growing. It just means they aren't ready to flower yet. You might grow in containers for a good 2 years before you ever see a flower. And it's okay. It doesn't mean that you cannot harvest them. It just means that you're not seeing those flowers. All right, so now that we're talking about harvesting, let's talk about the 2 harvesting strategies available to you. And this is really about the short season versus the long season. And that could also be classified as containers versus in the ground. So your option 1, and this works well for your short season folks or for containers, is that you probably are going to be harvesting baby ginger after 4 to 6 months. And you want to wait as long as possible, because the longer you wait, the more you're going to get. So you could even bring your ginger plants indoors. If it's getting too cold outside at the end of the season, you could bring them indoors, and if you could find a way to provide more heat, they will continue to grow those rhizomes for you. All right, so you could harvest the whole plant, or you could harvest little bits of the plant. I'll mention that more in just a moment. And the second harvest method is if you are in a longer season, or if you're growing in the soil and you have that full 8 to 10 months to wait for the plant to come to full maturity. What you want to do is dig up the entire plant, and you want to carefully dig all around the outer edges of the plant. Make sure you're not breaking any of the rhizomes. It's good to have a tool to do this, but with your hands you can kind of sense where the plant is. And then you're basically going to lift the entire plant out all at once so that you don't lose any of the little bits and pieces. And what you want to do after that is you separate off the mother root, the original mother root, from the rest of the rhizomes, and then you're going to keep the mother root and save it for replanting later. All right. And the thing is with the harvesting process is that if you're harvesting early, you're going to notice that there's a range of thickness with the stems. And typically, if the stems are a minimum of 1/4 of an inch or 1/2 an inch and it's beyond 6 months, you're definitely ready to harvest some ginger and some turmeric. And those stems will get thicker and thicker. And the thicker the stem is, usually that means the bigger the harvest below ground. All right. And then the cool thing is that if you're growing in a short season, or if you're growing in containers, what you can do is you can dig up and expose some of the rhizomes, and you can break off little pieces that you want and let the rest continue to grow throughout the rest of the season if you want to have a continuous harvest versus all at once at the end of the season. And your yield is going to depend on the amount of nutrients that you added. That's why your feeding strategy was so important, and on the amount of moisture that the plants receive. Now you've come to the end of the season and you've harvested your plants. Congratulations. So you're going to enjoy that wonderful harvest and you're going to do it all again. So the good news is that ginger and turmeric are perennial. And so for overwintering or off season, for those of you in long season where you have temperate climates throughout the winter, but temperatures that drop below 50, for people who are growing outdoors, you just leave the mother outdoors over winter. It'll go dormant and then basically it'll re-sprout again in the spring. Or you can bring the mother indoors for the winter, for those of you with cold seasons, and basically plant the mother inside of a potting mix. It will start to sprout. It'll be ready for the spring. And a lot of folks in cold seasons, they get started growing these as early as January indoors so that they're ready to plant them outdoors when the plant is already pretty sizable. All right, so now you've mastered the 3 stages to growing amazing ginger and turmeric. So basically step 1, getting started. Step 2, feeding your plants well throughout the season. And 3, harvesting. So now you have this amazing harvest, and what do you do with all of it? So for a lot of folks, they end up getting a lot of ginger or turmeric all at once because they wait until the end of the season, and so they get a big load of it. And you can put your ginger and turmeric, it's always best used fresh. All of your food is always best used fresh because it's the maximum amount of nutrients that you're ever going to get out of it is straight from the ground. So you can cook with it, you can make smoothies with it, you can chop it up and put it over salads. There's so many ways to enjoy ginger and turmeric. It's spicy and delicious. And there are ways to preserve it for later as well. And the 2 very simple things that I do, when I get a big harvest like this, what I like to do is I like to cut it up into pieces that are like the size of my thumb. And then I basically stick all of those in the freezer because I use them for smoothies and that's about the size I use. Or if I'm going to cook a stir fry, that's about the right amount that I'm going to chop up and use in a stir fry. And so I'll cut them up into like the size of my thumb and then I'll store them in the freezer for as long as I need until I use them all. And that is also going to be the freshest option. When you freeze ginger and turmeric, it really freezes all of those nutritional benefits in there as well. Now, the second best way to save some for later is to dry it, similar to what you see at the grocery store. So what you can do is you can chop it up. You can put it in a dehydrator. I would not recommend an oven for this. I would recommend a dehydrator, which dehydrates at lower temperatures, like 140 degrees Fahrenheit or less. And basically, I would take pieces of it and I would cut them into slivers that are 1/4 of an inch thick, like 1/4 of an inch thick slices, dry them completely, and then store them away. And you can grind it up from there and store it, but if you leave it in those pieces, more of the nutritional benefits are going to be stored before you grind it. And then when you're ready to use it, then you can grind it up. And once it's dried and ground, you can put it in your smoothies again, you can put it on your salads again, you can put it in your stir fries, and cool, you can also sprinkle it on top of your food like tacos, anything you want. So now you guys know everything. You can really grow this superfood, ginger and turmeric, right at home. Doesn't matter what climate. As long as you follow the tips here, you're going to master the process and you're going to find a lot of success. I wish you lots of joy and lots of an abundant harvest of ginger and turmeric. Thank you guys so much. Love you.